There were actually 11 Whitechapel murders, who many, including some of the Jack the Ripper experts, attribute to Jack the Ripper. But for this tour series, I'll just be focusing on the 5 canonical or acknowledged victims, and these are the ladies that are attributed to Jack the Ripper. And as Matt said in our original tour, of course it's called the Jack the Ripper tour, but rather it should be called the lives of Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly. And with this tour it will be different to the first one, because I'll be able to take you to the actual locations where each lady was murdered or their bodies found, but as they are nowadays, because we have to remember none of the locations survive in their original form. But in our story, then and now, there is one building that plays quite a pivotal role, and that's a church, and it's known as the Prostitutes' Church, the Church of St Botolph's without Aldgate. Now throughout our series I'll be weaving us in and out of the past. We'll be able to walk in places that the ladies walked and recognised, and St Botolph's Church Aldgate is one of those places. It's an important one because it's known as the Prostitutes' Church for a reason. In its day, and in the day of these ladies here, many prostitutes and their clientele would walk around the exterior of the church frequenting the night looking for customers or a lady of the night. So, back in the present, that's where you're going to join me now, the Prostitutes' Church in Aldgate. So join me there.
Morning ladies and gents, and you join me in the early morning. It's nearly 7 o'clock and we're at the Church of St Botolph's without Aldgate, better known for our causes as the Prostitutes' Church. What we're going to do is have a little wander around, frequent around the, so we say, the exterior of the church, as our ladies would have done in 1888. Then from there I'm going to give you as good a taste of their world of 1888 East End as I can. Then from here we'll be off to our first actual murder location. Throughout the course of our tour we'll be zipping in and out of history and in and out of their world, and with this one I wanted to take us to the actual murder locations, although none of them exist in their original form anymore. I thought it would be good to do that in this tour. I mean, as Matt explained with his tour, to walk us to every location and back again and cover the tour would take over 4 hours. That's where these interactive aerial view maps help. They stop me from being mugged, attacked, becoming a 2024 version of what happened in 1888 or anything nasty like that, because there's some dodgy areas that we have to pass through on our journeys, particularly Whitechapel. Spitalfields is different because it's more gentrified and we can walk the streets and they're so original. We know we're walking in the footsteps of our 5 ladies and of course of the BSTARD that killed them. And here we have the Church of St Botolph's without Aldgate, and Aldgate Square, a very different modern looking world now compared to the one of 1888, but it would have been around the exterior of this church which has stood the test of time that our ladies and their clients would have frequented the night. So you've seen the Prostitutes' Church, and this is where I wanted to begin us in the present. And as I said, on that note, I'll give you as good a taste of the world of 1880s East End as I can. So join me for that now.
Now, I can't take you back to the world of 1888 and late Victorian East End London, But through this very rare piece of footage of East End from the very late Victorian era, and the pictures that we're going to see in a minute, we can get a glimpse of the world that Our Ladies lived in, which of course was a dangerous and dark world at times, but was also a world full of characters like this man here, and ordinary type of people just trying to get by. It wasn't an easy world to live in. It was damn right dangerous, as we're going to learn through our story, of course. But there would have been moments like these to give a little bit of a respite from that. Here we get to see the faces and the real characters of EastEnders. They look so stolid and sour in their pictures, but here we get to see the very polar opposite of that. And the Bobby just gone by. That's a policeman to anyone that doesn't know that. She looks a character, this lady. He's just been caught stealing. And the London of their era, beautifully illustrated through this map. What I'm going to point out now with the arrow marked in pink is the city of London, and although its walls had long gone by the time of Our Ladies, the distinction between the city of London, marked with the arrow, and the East End of London, marked with the arrow now, was massive. There was a very, very great divide between the rich and the poor in those days. Some might say it's going back that way, unfortunately, but there we are. And we're going to get a look at 19th century Whitechapel. The Whitechapel Road, a road Our Ladies and Jack the Ripper himself would have frequented. And this is a typical Whitechapel slum of the era. A colourised version of that. And looking south towards St Mary's Church. St Mary's Church, Whitechapel, now a lost church, the Church of St Mary Matfallon, is where Whitechapel actually gets its name from. The original medieval church of St Mary's at Whitechapel was white, and it's where the area gets its name from, of the White Chapel. More East End scenes and streets and faces. And the Aldgate pump, most famously known for the Aldgate pump epidemic, which its water source became polluted and poisoned quite a lot of people in 1874, so not too many years before our tragic incidents. And the ladies, here you see the old houses on Aldgate High Street, just 5 years before the murders. I like to show you all this because I want to immerse you in their world. See, with the tours, and this is one of the things I liked about Matt's tour, is that he focused on the ladies a lot, and that's what it should be about. So, to get a glimpse of their world then and now, because some of these places do survive, as we're going to be able to walk through. And, of course, look, the prostitutes' church, the Church of St Botolph's at Aldgate. And this is it, pretty bang on the era that the ladies would have recognised it, and the time when prostitutes at the night time would have been frequenting, walking around the church, and their customers walking around looking for prostitutes. And the interior of the church, exactly of the era as any of Our Ladies, or even Jack himself, if he went into such a place as a church, would have recognised it. And if you want to see that in the daytime and get a nice little glimpse of it inside, see my other video of walking in the footsteps of the five ladies, where we go inside and we hear the Christmas carols being practised by the choir. And I'm not ashamed to admit it, as I walked around in the church and heard that, it became, it's unusual for me, slightly emotional at the thought of, did any of Our Ladies ever hear the church choir of 1888 practising for their Christmas that they would never see? Spitalfields, and this view, then and now, plays a very pivotal role in our story. To the right, you've got the 10 Bells pub. To the left, you've got Spitalfields Market with a lost pub in front of it, and you can see the busy hustle and bustle of Commercial Street. And over to the left, where the 10 Bells pub is, the street that leads down there is the famously historic Fernier Street, which was built in the 18th century for French Huguenot silk weavers. And we will walk those streets. They play a pivotal role. Brushfield Street, leading to Miller's Court. If you walk down Brushfield Street, and this is a view pretty much from where the 10 Bells is, this is the view that Mary Jane Kelly and Jack the Ripper would have seen as they walked across the road, down Brushfield Street, in towards the left where the old Miller's Court was, and where he performed the worst of the last canonical or acknowledged murders. I mean, hers was absolutely brutal, as we will discover. Trigger warning now already, but there will be some because they are necessary. And I've chosen photos exactly of the era, so we're looking at views and sights they would have seen and recognised. Unfortunately, with our 5 ladies, the 5 canonicals, Mary Ann, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly, they all had one thing in common. And unfortunately, that one thing in common was alcohol. They were all alcoholics, and drink played an unfortunate role in their lives and downfalls, and where they ended up and where they got there, because none of their lives really started off in the depths of depravity and prostitution and 19th century Whitechapel where they ended up. None of their lives started out like that, or where you would think. This is why I thought it's so important to show their story and bring them to life. Many slums were cleared in the East End throughout the 19th century, and homelessness went up. And the sad thing was that you could walk around and not be bothered, but if you stopped and sought refuge in a corner or something, or in the East End, the police would come along and you'd often get a kick and be moved on. So for many women on their own or separated, being homeless was a dangerous bloody world, because you were open to types of dangers most women, thankfully, in England don't have to imagine nowadays. So what a lot of women that were homeless or separated from their husbands and such like would do is they'd get together with a homeless man. The men often in those days would carry a knife. They could offer protection where a woman couldn't protect herself in that world. There was at least some type of protection, but they couldn't pay the man for his protection, so the only way to repay him was through sexual favours. And here we see the police questioning a homeless person in the course of investigations for the crimes of Jack the Ripper in 1888. And prostitutes. We nowadays, when we think of a prostitute, we imagine, as Matt said on our original tour, a woman with lovely skin and nice white teeth and good hair and looking very glamorous and sexy. But the prostitutes of the 19th century very much did not look like that. Most of them were approaching what was deemed of the time then middle age. The average life expectancy for a woman in those days in London was between 40 to 55 years, and even a woman that wasn't living as dangerous as a life as a prostitute, her life was very dangerous, because if she was a married woman that bore children, you had the very dangerous risk of all the risks that came with childbirth. It was come the age of 30, 40, many of the women that would have been 30 or 40 looked much older than they did and then they were. And you're looking at the faces here of 19th century prostitutes. So when you imagine a glamorous, sexy image, this is really what you would have been getting. And now, back to the Whitechapel of our own time of 2024 as we head for the first murder location. And to get us there, I shall take us via the interactive aerial view map from the Prostitutes Church of St Botolph's, Aldgate, to the location of our first murder. And that's Mary Ann Nichols. So off we go. And leaving the Prostitutes Church of St Botolph's of our Aldgate now, we're on our way to the first murder location in Whitechapel, along Aldgate High Street and the Whitechapel Road. To our right, where you see the trees and green space, is the site of the lost Church of St Mary Matfelon, the Whitechapel, from where Whitechapel of course gets its name. And here we are now, along Whitechapel Road, just going past the site of the old London Hospital frontage, and here we are. We're on the Whitechapel Road, and I'm going to drop us off right by Whitechapel station, so you'll join me back on the ground there, and I'll take you to the site of the first murder location, which is round the back of Whitechapel station, and that's Mary Ann Nichols. So join me on the ground.
And a good early hours of the morning to you, ladies and gents. And I've dropped us off along the Whitechapel Road, as I said. Whitechapel station is just there. Having a lot of renovations and things done on it at the moment. This, what we're looking at here, is a memorial in grateful and loyal memory of Edward VII, Rex Imperator, erected from subscriptions raised by Jewish inhabitants of the East London, 1911. But what I really want to show us is this, the London Hospital. This is its original frontage, the Royal London Hospital. The hospital is nothing to do with this now. This is now Tower Hamlets Town Hall. But it would have been into this building that the Elephant Man, who in a row of one of the shops that we've been looking at along this road behind me, was displayed as a freak in a freak show, but that's a story for another time. As I said, I would take us to the Whitechapel Road, and I'm now going to take you to the site of the first canonical or acknowledged murder. As I said in our intro, there are actually 11 Whitechapel murders. See my other piece on were there more for that, but in this one we cover only the 5 canonical or acknowledged ones. And we leave the relative safety and confines of Whitechapel Road and go down this little alleyway here, Court Street. Which takes us behind the back of Whitechapel station, as I said. And to our first site. I've got notes written on paper this time. It would not do in this area to have 2 phones on display. And it is about 25 past 3 in the morning. Most self-respecting smackheads, druggies, muggers, looters, robbers are safely in their beds by now, we should hope. And here we are. We're now on Durward Street, which was formerly Bucks Row. Very little of Bucks Row actually survives from the time. The site of the murder is completely swept away. But this school was here in 1888. Bombed in the war, damaged, patched up, and now serves its life as luxury accommodation. What we're walking past here now is formerly a playground, and a few years ago was a building site for a new entrance into Whitechapel station. But just in here, round about there, is where Mary Ann Nichols was discovered and presumably murdered. So let me get my paper notes out. Mary Ann Nichols also went by the name of Polly, and she was the first canonical or acknowledged victim. Mary Ann Nichols was aged 43 in 1888. Her body was discovered on Friday the 31st of August 1888 at 3:40 a.m. by Carmen Charles Allen Cross, and his birth surname was Lechmere. So we've seen the spot where Mary Ann's life came to an end and where she was discovered. Now we'll go fully into Mary Ann and her tragic story.
Now, I've done a full written biography for each of the ladies. It goes into much more detail about their early lives and stuff like that. So if that's something you'd be interested in, I've added the link at the bottom of the description box. But Mary Ann Nichols, or Polly as we're going to call her, she was born Mary Ann Walker on Tuesday the 26th of August 1845 in the City of London. She married William Nichols on Saturday the 16th of January 1864 at St Bride's Church in Fleet Street. If that's something you'll be interested in seeing, see my other video of walking in the footsteps of the five ladies, and you'll be able to see the very church in which they married. And she was murdered on Friday the 31st of August 1888 at Bucks Row, Whitechapel. And here we can see Mary Ann's family. Her husband William, marked with the arrow now. Just below him is his second wife, Rosetta Walls. And to the left, you've got Mary Ann and William's son, George Percy Nichols, with his wife. I thought it'd be nice to show the family of one of the ladies. Polly was 45 in 1888, but in this photo we see her in her 30s as a married woman with children. Sadly though, and I've said this quite a lot in my videos, infant mortality rates in those days were absolutely horrendous. Every mother would have to expect to lose at least one out of every 3 children. Mary lost more than that. And that not being bad enough, her husband had an affair with a neighbour, the very midwife who delivered the last baby. Mary Ann's drinking, which had always been a bit of a problem, got considerably worse. On the 6th of September 1880, the couple moved into their own home at 6D Block, Peabody Buildings, Stamford Street, Blackfriars Road, paying a weekly rent of 5 shillings and 9pence. Shortly thereafter, however, the couple separated, with William relocating with his 4 children to an address near the Old Kent Road. William was legally required to support his wife as long as she was living alone and as a single woman. William initially had to pay Polly a weekly allowance of 5 shillings, but in the spring of 1882 he received news that she was living with another man and earning her money through prostitution. So he ceased these weekly payments. These boyfriends, or men with which Mary Ann lived, never stayed long. Her life between 1882 and 1887 was one of workhouses, homelessness and casual prostitution when she couldn't find any alternative work. Then, just a few months before the tragic events which ended her life, it looked like she got lucky. On the 12th of May 1888, Polly got a job working as a live-in servant with a well-to-do couple, Samuel and Sarah Cowdery. The Cowderys lived at Ingleside on Rose Hill Road in Wandsworth. Samuel was a clerk of works for the police, and Sarah was 1 year younger than her husband. They were described as upright people, and both were very religious and teetotalers. So really, for the first time in years, Polly had a room of her own, clean clothes, warmth and safety. The work wasn't hard, and the family she had to serve wasn't an unpleasant one to serve. The problem was for Polly, though, was she was a heavy drinker, and the people she worked for did not drink and wouldn't allow drink into the house. Polly wrote to her father, "I just write you to say you will be glad to know I am settled in my new place and going all right up to now. My people went out yesterday and have not returned, so I am left in charge. It is a grand place inside, with trees and gardens back and front. All has been newly done up. They are teetotalers and religious, so I ought to get on. They are very nice people, and I have not too much to do. I hope you are all right and the boy has work. So goodbye for the present. From yours truly, Polly. Answer soon, please, and let me know how you are." Her father did reply to the letter, but didn't get a reply. She worked for the Cowderys for 2 months and then left, stealing some clothes worth £3.10. The last known address and movements of Polly. On the 24th of August 1888, Polly moved to a lodging house known as the White House on 56 Flower and Dean Street. In this doss house, single men and women were allowed to share one bed. And here we see images of a common doss house. And these are the coffin beds, the 4-penny beds you would have to pay 4p a night for, and they did look just like coffins. Another alternative was, and where we get the saying from, "Cor, you could sleep on a clothesline," was known as a twopenny hangover, where you would literally sleep hanging on a rope, and you'd pay 2p for that. And in the morning someone would come along and loose the rope, and up you would all wake. And that is where the saying, "You could sleep on a clothesline," comes from. Heavy rains had ushered out one of the coldest and wettest summers on record. On the night of the 30th of August, the rain was sharp and frequent, and was accompanied by peals of thunder and flashes of lightning. The sky on that night was turned red by the occasion of 2 dock fires. At 11 p.m, Polly is seen walking down the Whitechapel Road. She was probably soliciting for trade. At this time in 1888, the services of a destitute prostitute like Polly Nichols could be had for 2 or 3p, or a stale loaf of bread. 3 to 4p was the going rate for a price of a large glass of gin. And when you say large glass of gin, it wouldn't be mixed with nice things like what we drink gin with now. It would be one large glass of straight gin that you would sit and drink all night long. Mother's ruin, and get yourself pissed on. At 12:30 a.m, she's seen leaving the Frying Pan public house at the corner of Brick Lane and Thrall Street. Here's a picture of that pub in 1888. Here's the inside of the Frying Pan pub. It's an eatery kind of restaurant thing now, all been completely gutted out and done up. And she returns to the lodging house at Flower and Dean Street. At 1:20 or 1:40 a.m, she is told by the deputy to leave the kitchen of the lodging house where she had arranged with someone else to sleep, because she couldn't produce her DOS money. Polly, on leaving, asks him to save her a bed, and says, "Never mind, I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got." She now indicates a little black bonnet, which no one had seen her have before. And here's an example of a late Victorian lady's black hat. And in those days, everyone wore hats. Men wore hats, women wore hats. It was quite a thing to be seen bareheaded in the street. It wasn't a good sign for a woman, actually. At 12:30 a.m, she meets Emily Holland, who was returning from watching the Shadwell Dry Dock fire. Here's a little newspaper article of that from the time. Pause to read if you want, because I'll be moving on now. There are only so many genres I can cover. Outside of a grocer's shop on the corner of Whitechapel Road and Osborne Street, Polly had come down Osborne Street. Emily Holland describes her as being very drunk, and she staggered against a wall. Holland calls attention to the church clock striking 2:30. Polly tells Emily that she had had her DOS money 3 times that day and drunk it away. She says, "I will return to Flower and Dean Street, where she could share a bed with a man, after one more attempt to find trade. I've had my DOS money 3 times today and spent it," she says. "It won't be long before I'm back." The two women talked for 7 or 8 minutes. Polly leaves, walking down the Whitechapel Road, and that is the last time that Polly, or Mary Ann Nichols, was seen alive. At 3:40 a.m, a carman named Charles Allen Cross, birth surname of Lechmere, discovered what he initially believed to be a tarpaulin laying in the ground in front of a gated stable entrance in Bucks Row, renamed to Durward Street in 1892. Upon inspecting the object, Cross discovered that the tarpaulin was actually the body of a woman. She was laying on her back, with her eyes open and her legs straight. Her skirts had been raised above the knees, and her left hand was touching the gate of the stable entrance. Another passing cart driver, on his way to work, Mr. Robert Poole, approached the location and observed Cross standing on the road staring at her body. Cross called him over, and both men walked towards the body, which they examined. Cross touched the woman's face, which was still warm, then her hands, which were cold. He expressed his opinion to Poole that the woman was dead, but Poole was uncertain and thought that she may simply be drunk or unconscious. The two pulled her skirts down to cover her lower body, then went in search of a policeman. Upon encountering P.C. Jonas Mizzen, Cross informed the constable of their discovery, adding, "She looks to me either dead or drunk, but for my part, I believe she's dead." The two men then continued on their way to work, leaving Mizzen to head towards their discovery. Shortly before Mizzen reached Bucks Row, P.C. John Neal approached the street from the opposite direction on his beat, illuminating Mary Ann Nichols' body with his lantern. By flashing his lantern, Neal attracted the attention of P.C. John Thane, as his beat passed the entrance to Bucks Row, shouting, "Here's a woman here with her throat cut. Run at once for Dr. Llewellyn." Neal then inspected the crime scene to look for blood trails. With his lantern, he saw none, He also examined the road, but saw no marks of wheels from a cart, or a carriage, etc. In fact, the lack of blood at first led authorities to believe, and still baffled some at the time, and made them think that she'd been killed elsewhere. P.C. Thane, theft surgeon Dr. Llewellyn, arrived in Bucks Row at 4 a.m. Llewellyn observed that 2 deep knife wounds had been inflicted on Polly's throat and quickly pronounced her life extinct, determining through the fact that her body and legs were still warm that she had been dead for approximately 30 minutes. He then ordered P.C. Neal to remove the body to the old Montague Street mortuary, upon a handcart Mizzen had fetched, stating, "Move the poor woman to the mortuary. She is dead. I'll make further examination of her there." Polly's body was moved into the old Montague Street mortuary at 5:20 a.m. The injuries to her abdomen were discovered by an Inspector Spratling, who immediately sent for Dr. Llewellyn again, who initially had returned to his home. He had to cut many layers of dresses and garments that Polly had been wearing. Now, in Matt's tour, he told us on the tour that all these layers had soaked up much of the blood, which explained for the general lack of bloodlessness at the murder scene. But through my own research, and particularly through the newspaper articles that Sam Tucker's been kind enough to send me, I've been able to find nothing to back that up, even though every garment she was wearing at the time, as we're going to see in a bit, of her murder, every detail was recorded thoroughly. In fact, many in 1888 were still nonplussed by the lack of blood at the scene, and made no mention of blood-drenched clothing. Once all the layers were removed, he discovered bruising to the face, and that the murderer had cut her throat with such ferocity that the knife had hit her spinal cord. Her private parts had been stabbed twice, and her abdomen had been mutilated with 1 deep jagged wound, 2 or 3 inches from the left side. Several incisions had also been inflicted across the abdomen, causing her bowels to protrude through the wounds, and 3 or 4 similar cuts ran down the right side of her body. These cuts had also been inflicted with the same knife, estimated to be at least 6 to 8 inches long, and possibly a cork cutter or shoemaker's knife. Each wound had been inflicted in a violent downward thrusting manner. Llewellyn further opined his belief that the murderer possessed some anatomical knowledge. No organs were missing though, however. Llewellyn believed that Polly had been facing her attacker when he had held his hand across her mouth, causing the facial bruising, before cutting her throat. Death would have been almost instantaneous, and all her abdominal injuries, which would have taken less than 5 minutes to perform, were made by the murderer after she was dead. And this is the very detailed inventory of the clothes taken by Inspector Spratling at the mortuary. She was wearing overall impression that they were shabby and stained. Now they went into such thorough detail, and they mentioned nothing about blood-drenched clothing, soaking up all the blood, explaining for bloodlessness at the scene, as we're going to see in a minute, also by the newspaper articles, which were a bit nonplussed. So this is everything that was in her possession. Do pause to read if you want to. And these are those newspaper articles that Sam Tucker was kind enough to send me. The Whitechapel murder, the inquest. Up to the present time, the police have made no arrest in connection with the Whitechapel murder. But they believe they have an important clue. The latest investigations point to the probability of the murder having been committed at some distance from the spot where the body was found, possibly in a house in the locality. An inquest was opened by Mr. Wynne Baxter on Saturday afternoon on the woman identified as Mary Ann Nichols. Edward Walker Nordwell of Albany Road, Camberwell, formerly a smith, identified the body as that of his daughter. So Edward Walker Nordwell is Mary Ann's father, Polly's father. She was 42 years old, married William Nichols, a painter, 22 years ago. They had been separated for 7 or 8 years. The husband was still living. Witness stated that up to the year 1886 the deceased lived with him and then left. She was not a sober woman. He believed that she went to live with another man named Drew in Woolworth some time after separating from her husband. Witness could not throw any light on the case. And here's the next article from the second edition. Today's Telegrams, the Whitechapel murder. The inquest was resumed at Whitechapel this morning on the body of Mary Ann Nichols, who was found murdered on Friday morning in Bucks Row. No arrest has yet been made. Inspector Spratling, J Division, said that at 4:30 on Friday morning, when in the Hackney Road, he received information of the finding of the body. He went to a mortuary in company with a constable. Witness described the nature of the injuries. The inspector was unable to describe the precise condition of the clothes at the time the body was found. It was stated to the coroner that another officer and Inspector Helson would give evidence on this point. Witness proceedings said between 11 o'clock and noon he examined Bucks Row but found no bloodstains. Afterwards he examined the London District Railway embankment of the Eastern Railway without discovering any traces of blood or a weapon. Henry Tompkins, a horse slaughterer who was working in Winthrop Street adjoining Bucks Row, with 2 companions, said they had heard no suspicious noises during the night, though the gate to the slaughterhouse was open. They left at 12:20. On hearing of the murder, he and the other men went to the spot. Witness was of the opinion that the woman was murdered in her clothes and at the place where the body was found. Inspector Helson, J Division, described the condition of the deceased's clothing and said there were no cuts of any parts of the apparel and there were no cuts under the stays, meaning that to sustain those injuries and there not to be blood and gore all over the clothes. It's just so intriguing. She was possibly murdered elsewhere and the body put at Bucks Row. Now, as I said with Matt's tour, he said that the clothes were discovered to be soaked in so much blood and that explained the bloodlessness. I can find no reference to that whatsoever. Sam, obviously, with the newspaper article she sent me, which we've just read, the detail they go into, they would have noted the blood-drenched clothing, wouldn't they? So, a little bit of intrigue there, but you've just seen a couple of original 1888 newspaper articles into the tragedy of poor Polly. And as we leave her and her story behind, let's remember her in a nicer way, shall we? Polly Nichols, 1845 to 1888. A woman with a happy smiling face, who before everything went wrong was a mother. You see her son Percy Nichols with his wife, also called Mary Ann. And here you see Alice Esther Edwards, aged 36 in this photo. She was the eldest daughter of Polly Nichols. And one last look before I take you back into the present and towards our next canonical victim. A look at the face of Mary Ann or Polly Nichols. May she rest in peace, bless her, eh? Well, as we leave Durwood Street, formerly Bucks Row, and the site of Mary Ann, Polly Nichols' murder behind, just there, and take us back onto the Whitechapel Road. I like to do as much of the on-foot stuff as I can for you, because we are literally walking in the footsteps of the ladies, the 5 canonicals, and of the beast that murdered them. And the old buildings of which I spoke, of one of which poor Joseph Carey Merrick, the Elephant Man, was
displayed in the London Hospital frontage, now Tower Hamlets Town Hall. These things would have all been there in 1888, although our world has much changed. So I said towards our intro, or in the intro, I did want to immerse you in their world and ours as much as possible. You often find that the past and the present do intermingle with each other. Now we're back along the Whitechapel Road, the old London Hospital frontage, and I couldn't help but end us off in this little bit with a view of that fine frontage of the old Royal London Hospital that's seen so much history. And to get us to our next location, it's a journey straight down the Whitechapel Road and a walk of about 30 to 35 minutes for me. So I'll take you there in a quicker, and for me, a safer way. But there are some things along the way I want you to see. So there will be a couple of stop-off points, a few good points of history. So, off we go. I bought us the 10 to 15 minute walk down the Whitechapel Road via the interactive map, because it takes us past some pretty dodgy places I walked past with some dodgy looking characters hanging about outside. So filming the whole length, A, probably wouldn't be safe, and B, would take up a lot of time, and there isn't masses and masses to see, but I do want to show you the historical things, and this is one gem. Sadly closed now. The Whitechapel Bell Foundry, the church bell foundry, established AD 1570, and I show it because the Whitechapel Bell Foundry has been casting many bells, including the famous Liberty Bell in America, the famous Big Ben here, many bells across London, including many of the church bells that our ladies would have heard ringing on their nighttime wanderings. So that's the Whitechapel Bell Foundry. It's been closed now, and what's to happen with it we do not know. So yeah, it's a sad end really for a very historical and prestigious building. It'd be nice to see it opened as a museum or a heritage centre or something like that. But for our next one, it's a very short walk down this road here, so that's where I take us now. And we are in Whitechapel, so I couldn't not stop us on our historical journey and show us this place. Nowadays it's called the Ali Al-Tab Memorial Park, and it was renamed because of another awful murder. Look that one up. Our crimes were crimes against prostitutes. Poor Ali Al-Tab, that was very much a racially motivated attack, that one. Welcome to Ali Altab Park, and where we're going to walk through now, Ali Altab Park was formerly the church of St Mary Matfelon, the Whitechapel, from where Whitechapel gets its name. And you can still see some of the imprints of the old chapel. There's some of the tiles, and we're kind of standing within the blueprint of it now. They seem to have problems with moles. I always wonder if that's some kind of entrance down into a crypt or something. As we leave the Ali Altab Park behind. And St Mary Matfelon, medieval church, rebuilt over times, destroyed in the Second World War and never rebuilt, sadly. It's got its old water fountain out here, which was done up not long ago, so that's nice. God, it smells really strong of gas here. I'm getting well away from there. And our next port of call is just over the road there, so another short journey. So I will cross us over. Oh, there's a very strong smell of gas there roundabouts. Thank goodness I wasn't smoking then. People always bib when they see you filming. That one waved in a friendly way, so bin lorry guy. Now, we're at Aldgate station here. Just pause you a sec. Sorry about that. Aldgate East Station, one of its entrances anyway. And you've got the Whitechapel Gallery next to it there. I shall walk us along this way. Now this place doesn't particularly play a role in the story of our 5 canonicals, although they very likely would have drank in it, and most certainly would have passed through the alleyway to go to a certain place. But it does play a role in the story of the 11 Whitechapel murders. Now, of the 11 people of the Whitechapel murders added to that case was Martha Tabram, who was the 3rd. Martha Tabram was killed just behind what is now Gunthorpe Street, which was originally George Yard, in the George Yard buildings. And this is the White Hart. And from here, I'll be taking you by map to our next location in Spitalfields. I can't unfortunately walk you through Gunthorpe Street because it is frequented by heroin addicts basically at this time of the morning, and it's full of them at the moment. But the White Hart and Gunthorpe Street is just there, but not forgetting to mention the extremely tastefully named Jack the Chipper. fish and chip shop. And now from here it will be via the interactive map to Commercial Street and the 10 Bells. And here we are on Commercial Street in Spitalfields. Christchurch Spitalfields, which you've just looked at. Spitalfields Market over there. Did say to you that this view in our intro, which you saw back in the old days, would play a pivotal role in our journey, because these streets were well known to the ladies and the monster that killed them. What we're looking at right in front of us here is the famous and iconic 10 Bells pub. Most strongly associated with Annie Chapman and Mary Jane Kelly, although Elizabeth Stride was once thrown out of it as well. And bear it in mind, because it will feature again in the story of Mary Jane Kelly. But where we're going to go now is down the famous and historic Fernier Street. Walking past the church. And with these streets and this slightly gentrified area, I can walk you through the streets quite safely. And so much of it, the old, remains, that we are literally walking in the footsteps of the ladies and the murderer. If you walk straight down the end there, that'll take you to Brick Lane. But where we go is down Wilkes Street. And where we shall meet our next victim. The old houses on Wilkes Street. Puma Court, looking straight down and into Spitalfields Market. Princelet Street. And here we are, Hanbury Street. As I said in the intro, none of the sites of the murders survive in their original state. But I did want you in this tour to be able to go to the places where they are now, as they stand now, where the ladies were murdered. And we are now looking at 29 Hanbury Street. And in the world of 1888, it's just 1 week after the first murder of Mary Ann Nichols. And we are, of course, in Hanbury Street in Spitalfields. And this is where we meet Annie Chapman. Annie was the oldest of the 5 canonical victims, and she was 48 years old in 1888. Annie's mutilated body was discovered on Saturday the 8th of September 1888, shortly before 6 AM, by an elderly resident of 29 Hanbury Street, a John Davis. So you see Hanbury Street as it is now, and now we'll go off into Annie Chapman and her tragic story.
Annie Chapman, born Eliza Ann Smith on Friday the 25th of September 1840 in Paddington in London, and she married John Chapman on Saturday the 1st of May 1869 at All Saints Church in Knightsbridge. She was murdered on Saturday the 8th of September 1888 at 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields. Annie was 48 years old in 1888, being the oldest of our 5 canonical victims. Her life started off so very differently, and not in the circumstances in which it ended, or the type of circumstances that you'd think such a life would lead you to. Although not wealthy, they were comfortably off enough. Paddington born, the daughter of a career soldier. Sadly, however, sadness touched Annie's life when she was just 22. Her father, George Smith, who was the valet to Captain Thomas Naylor Leyland of the Denbighshire Yeomanry Cavalry, slit his own throat on Saturday the 13th of June 1863. So I wonder, did Annie's stint off into adult alcoholism start with that? And here we see Annie and John Chapman on their wedding day. And here we see their marriage entry. Her married life, however, seemed to get off on a pretty good start. John Chapman was a well-paid coachman, and that's borne out by the fact that they were actually able to afford that wedding photograph we've just looked at. A photograph in the 1860s, having your photograph taken, would have been out of the pocket of most working class people. The daguerreotypes and tintypes of their era, they were bloody expensive. You would have had to stand still for a very long time to have it taken because of the exposure time. The whole process would have been expensive, even the clothing that they were wearing, which may have been rented, or it may have been their own. In the years following their marriage, the Chapmans lived at various West London addresses. In the early 1870s, John Chapman obtained employment in the service of a nobleman in Bond Street. Although Annie Chapman had struggled with alcoholism as an adult, she had reportedly weaned herself off of drink by 1880. Her son John's disability is believed to have contributed to her gradual reversion to alcohol dependency. John was born crippled. The Chapmans sought medical help for their son John at the London hospital, before later placing him in the care of an institution for the physically disabled close to Windsor. Annie, who drank through most of her pregnancies, I wonder, maybe did she blame herself for that? And here we see two of the Chapman children, Emily Ruth and Annie Georgina. In 1881, the Chapman family relocated from West London to Windsor, where John Chapman took on a job as a coachman to a farm bailiff named Josiah Weeks. The Chapman family, living in the attic rooms of St Leonard's Hill Farm Cottage on the estate of Sir Francis Tress Barry, who we see here, and this is his estate. The following year, their daughter Emily Ruth died of meningitis on her brother's 2nd birthday at the age of 12. Following the death of their daughter, both Chapmans took to heavy drinking. Over the following years, Annie is known to have been arrested on several occasions for public intoxication in both Clewer and Windsor. Annie and her husband separated by mutual consent, though not divorce, in 1884. John Chapman retained custody of their surviving daughter, while Annie relocated to Whitechapel, East London. Her husband was obliged to pay her a weekly allowance of 10 shillings by a post office order. The precise reason for the couple's separation is unknown, although later police reports list the reason for their separation as Annie's drunken and immoral ways. 2 years later, in 1886, John resigned from his job due to his decline in health and relocated to New Windsor. He died of liver cirrhosis and edema on Christmas Day, the 25th of December 1886, leading to the cessation of Annie's weekly payments. Annie Chapman learned of her husband's death through her brother-in-law. Her surviving daughter, Annie Georgina, then aged 13, was said to have subsequently been placed in a French institute or have joined a performing troupe which travelled with a circus in France. However, the truth is, the census records from 1891 reveal that both the Chapman's surviving children were living with their grandmother in Knightsbridge. By 1886, Annie is known to have resided with a man who made wire sieves for a living, consequently becoming known to acquaintances as Annie Civvy or Siffy. Shortly after John Chapman's death in 1886, this sieve maker left Annie, possibly due to the cessation of her allowance, and relocated to Notting Hill. One of Annie Chapman's friends said she became depressed after this separation and seemed to lose the will to live. By May or June 1888, Annie resided in Crossingham's lodging house at 35 Dorset Street in Spitalfields, and here we see Dorset Street in Spitalfields in 1902. So it wouldn't have changed all that much in the subsequent years. And here we see the lodging house, Crossingham's lodging house, and she was paying 8p a night for a double bed. According to the lodging house deputy, Timothy Donovan, a 47-year-old bricklayer's labourer named as Edward the Pensioner Stanley would typically stay with Annie at the lodging house between Saturday and Monday, occasionally paying for her bed. She earned some income from crochet work, making antimacassars, and working as a flower seller, and supplemented that by casual prostitution when she couldn't find the other work. On Saturday, September the 1st, 1888, Annie Chapman fought with another lodger, Eliza Cooper, over a bar of soap. It appeared that Annie got the raw end of the deal and was sporting bruises and complaining of feeling ill on Monday the 3rd. On September the 4th, her friend Amelia Palmer noticed that Annie had not been drinking because of her pain. Palmer told Annie to go to the casual ward and get treated for her injuries. Annie was back at Crossingham's lodging house on Friday, September the 5th, and spent the afternoon sitting in the kitchen because she felt unwell. She left later in the day and met with her sister, who gave her some money. Annie then ran into Amelia Palmer and again complained of feeling ill. Later in the evening, Annie went to the hospital for some medicine and stopped along the way to spend her money on beer in the 10 Bells pub, Spitalfields. She then returned to sit in the lodging house kitchen and to take supper. At around 2 a.m, John Evans, the lodging house night watchman, turned her out for not having enough for her bed. Dark Annie, as she was also known, some say because of her temper and some say because of her dark hair, said that she would earn her bed money and return soon, but many thought that she was very drunk when she headed towards Spitalfields. The next 4 hours of Annie's life remain a complete mystery. And here we see a then and now. On the left you see the front of Hanbury Street in 1888, and on the right you see the front of Hanbury Street, number 29, a picture that I took myself in 2024. And here is the front, 1888, and at the back the stairs that lead in. And it is the back that is our point of interest. At approximately 5:15 a.m, a tenant of 27 Hanbury Street named Albert Kadosh entered the yard of the property to use the outside lavatory. Kadosh later informed police that he heard a woman say, "No, no," before hearing the sound of something or someone falling against the fence dividing the backyards of number 27 and number 29 Hanbury Street. He did not investigate these sounds. Such things like that were common heard in the East End, and people generally tended to mind their own business. Annie Chapman's mutilated body was discovered shortly before 6 a.m. by an elderly resident of 29 Hanbury Street named John Davis. Davis noticed that the front door was now open while the back door was shut. Her body was lying on the ground near the doorway to the backyard, with her head 6 inches from the step of the property. Davis alerted 3 men named John Green, James Kent and Henry Holland of his discovery, before all 3 ran down Commercial Street to find a policeman, as Davis reported his discovery at the nearest police station. At the corner of Hanbury Street, Kent and Holland found Divisional Inspector Joseph Lunis Chandler and told him another woman has been murdered. Chandler followed the man to Chapman's body before requesting assistance from police surgeon Dr. George Bagster Phillips. Phillips and more officers, several policemen, arrived within minutes. They were instructed to clear the passage yard and to ensure that Dr. Phillips had access. Phillips arrived at Hanbury Street at approximately 6:30 a.m. Dr. Phillips was quickly able to establish a definite link between Annie Chapman's murder and the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, which had occurred on the 31st of August. Nichols has also suffered 2 deep slash wounds to the throat, inflicted from the left to the right side. Before the murder had mutilated the abdomen, and with a blade of similar size and design that had been used in both murders. 2 pills, which Annie Chapman had been prescribed for a lung condition, and a section of torn envelope and a small piece of frayed coarse muslin, and a comb were recovered from close by her body. A leather apron, partially submerged in a bowl of water, located close by, in the yard by a tap, was also discovered near her body. Bear leather apron in mind, and the fact that it was not soaked in blood. Annie Chapman's throat had been cut from left to right so deeply that the bones of her vertebral column bore striations. She had been disemboweled, with a section of the flesh from her stomach being placed upon her left shoulder, and another section of skin and flesh, plus her small intestines, being removed and placed above the right shoulder. The mortuary examination revealed that part of her uterus and bladder was missing. Annie Chapman's protruding tongue and swollen face led Dr. Phillips to believe that she may have been asphyxiated with the handkerchief that was found around her neck before her throat was cut, and that her murderer had held her chin as he performed this act. As there were no blood trails leading away from the yard, he was certain that she was killed where she was found. The official inquest into Annie Chapman's death was opened at the Working Lads Institute on Whitechapel on the 10th of September. The inquest was presided over by Middlesex coroner Wyn Edwin Baxter, who we see here. The inquest into Annie's murder lasted 5 days, with the final day of hearings being adjourned until the 26th of September. No further witnesses testified on this date, although Coroner Baxter informed the jury, "I have no doubt, if the perpetrator of this foul murder is eventually discovered, our efforts will not have been useless." Here we see Annie Chapman's death certificate. Moving on. And remember, I said leather apron, and to bear the fact that the apron was not found on the body soaked in blood. On the tour I went with Matt, he tells us that the apron was found by the body soaked in blood, and that the killer then became known as Leather Apron. The real story with Leather Apron is that the apron belonged to someone who lived upstairs, and the man's mother was washing it for him. And because the journalists really had nothing to print or write at that particular time, they happened on the salacious detail that there was a leather apron, and they attached the name Leather Apron to the killer. Here's a newspaper article which Sam Tucker kindly sent me. The Whitechapel murder. An important witness wanted. The officers of the Criminal Investigation Department, having received certain information with report to a man known throughout the district of Bethnal Green and King's Cross by the nickname of Leather Apron, and who is alleged for some time has been threatening and abusing a number of women, has been busily engaged in searching different lodging houses and casual wards throughout the metropolis in the hope of tracing this man. But whether he is any way connected with the murder of the woman Mary Ann Nichols or not cannot be ascertained. The description of the man wanted is aged 30 years, height 5 foot 3 inches, complexion dark, sallow, hair and moustache black, thick set, dressed in old and dirty clothing, and is of Jewish appearance. It being stated that the murdered woman was seen in the company of this man a few hours before her body was discovered in Bucks Row, Whitechapel. He ought at least to be an important witness at the adjourned inquest. So the press had really gone with this Leather Apron thing, and the real story of Leather Apron is a man named John Pizer. In the early days of the Whitechapel murders, Many locals suspected that Leather Apron was the killer, which was picked up on by the press, and John Pizer was known as Leather Apron. He had a prior conviction for a stabbing offence, and Police Sergeant William Thick apparently believed that he had committed a string of minor assaults on prostitutes. After the murders of Mary Ann Nichols and Annie Chapman in late August and early September 1888 respectively, Thick arrested Pizer on the 10th of September, even though the investigating inspector reported that there is no evidence whatsoever against him. He was cleared of suspicion when it turned out that he had alibis for 2 of the murders. He was staying with relatives at the time of one of the murders and was talking with police while watching a spectacular fire at the London docks at the time of the other murder. Pizer and Thick had known each other for years, and Pizer implied that the arrest was based on animosity rather than evidence. Pizer successfully obtained monetary compensation from at least one newspaper that named him as the murderer, Leather Apron. Thick himself was accused of being Jack the Ripper by T.H. Hasselwood of Tottenham in a letter to the Home Office dated 10th of September 1889. The presumably malicious accusations was dismissed without foundation. And here we see here the Whitechapel murder. It's another newspaper article that Sam Tucker has kindly sent me. Only one man is now detained in connection with the crime, viz. John Pizer, who was arrested and described yesterday as Leather Apron. The police have made a strict search of his lodgings, but the present evidence against him is of the faintest kind, and he will probably be discharged today. The man Pigott, arrested at Gravesend, has been placed in the Whitechapel infirmary, and the excitement has now entirely aborted and the district returns to normal. There's more of the article if you wish to pause and read, but I've gone into Leather Apron and everything that describes. But here is Sergeant William Thick. And here is a little better article that I can read better, to be honest with you. My eyesight's appalling, and I am wearing reading glasses as well. The Whitechapel murder. Release of Leather Apron. The man Pizer, nicknamed Leather Apron, arrested on suspicion of being concerned in the horrible Whitechapel murders, was released on Wednesday. At the inquest, Fountain Smith, a printer's warehouseman, identified the deceased as his sister and the widow of coachman at Windsor, that's Annie Chapman, from whom she had been separated. Leather Apron was also examined as a witness and stated that he had kept indoors since the outcry about the murder, by the advice of his brother, being the object of unjust suspicion and knowing that had he gone out he would have been torn to pieces. He gave a detailed account of his recent movements, which the coroner remarked was corroborated by inquiries of the police. Unfortunately, though, for John Pizer, the mud stuck, and whether he was a nice character or not, the shadow of Leather Apron never left him behind. His health, which had never been great in the first place, saw a rapid decline after this point, and he died of gastroenteritis at the Royal London Hospital in 1897 at the age of 46 or 47 years. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. What we have to think of is, although I am only covering the 5 canonicals with this tour, there were actually 11 Whitechapel murders. So we've covered 2 of them so far, but in the world of 1888 there has already been 5 murders that have been added to the Whitechapel case, and no one has been caught. So people were getting scared and people were getting angry, and businessmen were getting angry because it was destroying local trade. People didn't want to come in the area. People were shitting themselves, basically. But the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, it was a group of local civilian volunteers who patrolled the streets of London's Whitechapel district during the period of the Whitechapel murders of 1888. The volunteers were active mainly at night, assisting the Metropolitan Police in the search for the unknown murderer known as the Whitechapel Murderer, then Leather Apron, and latterly Jack the Ripper. The committee was led by a local builder named George Lusk, who was elected chairman during the first meeting on the 10th of September 1888, and the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee was formed just 2 days after the murder of Annie Chapman. And I've been careful at this point to myself, in my own descriptions, to try not to name the killer as who we best know him as. For a reason, I've called him the Beast, the B-E-S-T-A-R-D, the Monster, the Murderer, but not Jack the Ripper, until now. And that's where the Dear Boss letter comes in. The Dear Boss letter was a message allegedly written by the notorious and unidentified serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, addressed to the Central News Agency of London, which we see here. Its modern buildings, its buildings have been reused in modern times. The Central News Agency of London, and dated Tuesday the 25th of September 1888. Here we see the envelope for that. The letter was postmarked and received by the Central News Agency on Thursday the 27th of September 1888. The letter itself was forwarded to Scotland Yard on Saturday the 29th of September 1888. And here is the first page, the original. Although many dispute its authenticity, Dear Boss letter is regarded as the first piece of correspondence ultimately resulting in the unidentified killer being known by the name we best know him as Jack the Ripper. So this is where he first receives that title. This is page 1. I will read you through the letter in a sec. And this is the reverse side, the second page rather. The Dear Boss letter, written in red ink, was 2 pages long and contained several spelling and punctuation errors. The overall motivation of the author was evidently to mock investigative efforts and to allude to the future murders. The letter itself reads, and these are pictures that I took in the Jack the Ripper Museum, and this is one of the best facsimile copies that you will see of the Dear Boss letter, which reads, Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear from me with a funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue. This is the woman's blood is referring to, by the way. It went thick like glue, and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha ha. The next job, I shall clip the lady's ears. I shall clip the lady's ears off and send the police officers just for a jolly. Wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife is so nice and sharp, I want to get back to work right away. If I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the the Ripper. And that's where the beast receives its name. Don't mind giving me the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands, curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. Initially, the letter was considered to be just one of the many hoax letters which they received hundreds of, purporting to be from the murderer. However, following the discovery of the body of Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square on the 30th of September, investigators noted the section of the auricle and earlobe of her right ear had been severed, giving credence to the author's promise within the letter to clip the lady's ears off. In response to this, the Metropolitan Police published numerous handbills containing duplicates of both this letter and the Saucy Jack postcard, in hope that a member of the public would recognise the handwriting of the author. We're going to learn all about the Catherine Eddowes case and the Saucy Jack postcard in tomorrow night's episode. Numerous local and national newspapers also reprinted the text of the Dear Boss letter, in whole or in part. These efforts failed to generate any significant leads. However, in 1931, a journalist named Fred Best was reported to have confessed that he and a colleague at the Star newspaper named Tom Bullen had written the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard and other hoax messages purporting to be from the Whitechapel murderer, whom they together had chosen to name Jack the Ripper, in order to maintain acute public interest in the case and generally maintain the higher sales of their publication. But many claim, with his friend safely dead and unable to yea or nay say him, that Fred Best had made up this story about being authors of these letters to gain notoriety for himself in later life. Interesting subject and an interesting mystery, eh? And as I said, this letter is the Dear Boss letter, and it is where Jack the Ripper first became known as Jack the Ripper. With the first murders, it was the Whitechapel murderer. Then, when the press balls up got on Leather Apron, it was Leather Apron. And then when this letter hit, that's how we know him as Jack the Ripper. Many arrests were made over the following days, as you can see from a police news illustration from the time. The police and the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee were patrolling the streets with dogs and St Bernards and bloodhounds and all sorts, searching for Jack the Ripper. Sadly to no avail. But that's enough talk about Jack the Ripper for this evening. Let's remember the two ladies whose stories we've covered tonight. Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman. And a God bless you and rest in peace to both of them. Join me again tomorrow evening as we cover another night and more murders and more mystery. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow evening.